Well, now Donald Trump says the United States is prepared to take action against North Korea with or without the help of China. The president is demanding that Beijing gets tougher towards North Korea over its nuclear program, telling the Financial Times, if China's not going to solve North Korea, we will. Well, I'm joined now on Skype by Ambassador Christopher Hill, the former US ambassador to South Korea. Here with me is Victor Gao, the director of the China National Association of International Studies and an executive director of Beijing Private Equity Association. A very good evening to you, gentlemen. Mr. Ambassador, if I could start with you. And what are Donald Trump's options if he does decide to sort this out on his own?
Well, first of all, none of us is really clear what he means by that, but certainly if he's talking about military steps, that's not something we'd want to do on our own. There's some 20 million South Koreans within range of North Korean artillery, and so I think those 20 million people would want their government to be involved in any decision to take military action, and I think that would be required. Frankly, I think he's trying to focus the Chinese on the meeting ahead with the suggestion that we need to make some progress.
Well, Victor Gao, what will be the reaction to these comments in Beijing?
Well, first of all, the upcoming summit visit by the Chinese president to meet with President Donald Trump in Florida is a very important occasion, and we do not want to have any surprises which may hamper this summit meeting. Now, for the situation on the Korean Peninsula, neither China nor the United States are happy about the current situation. The challenge is really how China and the United States can cooperate together.
Well, can I just stay with you, Victor Gao, and ask you this? Is Beijing as worried about what's going on in Pyongyang in North Korea as the United States, as Japan, as the rest of the world?
Yes, I think so, for different reasons, perhaps. But China does not want to see the escalation of nuclear arms by DPRK or the growing sophistication of the launch capacity by the DPRK. China wants to put a complete stop to the nuclear program and the launch program by DPRK. The key issue is how to achieve this. Jingoism is not a solution. Going to war is not a solution. And in today's world, it's easy to start a war. The challenge is what to do with the war once it is started.
Or what to do to avoid one. Well, could this then be, Ambassador Hill, part of the much broader negotiations that have to take place between the United States and China, when, as Victor Gao mentions, the two presidents are going to meet very shortly? So many other issues on the table, such as Taiwan, the situation in the South China Sea, trade, the list goes on. And this is just one part of that jigsaw.
Yes, it is. But I want to emphasize that the issue of North Korea has become kind of front and center. In 2016, they had 2 nuclear explosions. They're much larger than the ones in the past. More recently, in 2017, they've continued to test missiles. They've tested new rockets on missiles, that is, new motors, rather, new solid fuel engines. They've tested multi-stage missiles. So we're getting to the point where they seem to be making progress on having a deliverable nuclear weapon. So this is a very serious matter. I completely agree with Victor Gao that both countries share the effort to try to get North Korea away from this and live up to their obligations to abandon their nuclear programs. The problem is how we do this. And certainly there are a number of measures, certainly stricter control of what goes in and out of North Korea in the form of sanctions, I think is probably going to be one element of it. We could even talk to the North Koreans, but I think it needs to be understood that we've reached agreements with the North Koreans that they've now repudiated, or at least don't seem to want to remember that they already agreed. So to have more talks with the North Koreans would be to have talks with someone who seems to have amnesia and doesn't want to talk about things that are already agreed. So I think any talks would have to be carefully planned. And finally, if there are military options, and I would agree with Victor Gao, there aren't any really good ones, this would be a very tough measure. And as I said earlier, would have to involve especially the South Koreans.
And I know you're well qualified to talk about those talks because you were part of them. Well, Victor Gao, what would happen, though, if we take this threat, if it is a threat at face value from President Trump, and the United States started to take out known nuclear and military installations in North Korea, what would the Chinese reaction be?
Well, first of all, I hope the United States and President Donald Trump will be very careful in approaching this very, very dangerous inflammable situation.
We've got to look at one of the interpretations of what he said is military action.
Yes, if military action happens, then it will only make the situation on the Korean Peninsula worse. It may actually result in
what would China say to the United States?
Casualties. I think China will need to repeat its position. That is, negotiation and diplomacy are still the way out. Everyone should avoid adding fuel.
I'm getting to the point, your analysts, if military action, Ambassador Hill, if military action were taking place by the United States on its own, or perhaps with the cooperation of South Korea, what do you think China would do?
Well, I can't speak for the Chinese government, but I think the Chinese government understands that doing nothing is also not an option, and especially doing things that will have no effect on North Korea's thinking should also not be an option. So there's no question that nobody wants nobody wants war in the Korean Peninsula, and certainly not those 20 million South Koreans living within that artillery range. But I think if it got to the point where North Korea is standing up a nuclear missile and pointing it at the United States, I think a U.S. president, any president, would have to make a very faithful decision to protect his own people. So we are getting to the point where North Korea really needs to understand this is a no laughing matter and they need to be serious.
But I suppose we should also ask Victor Gao, and just finally on this, if the United States did attack North Korea, it's not so much about the Chinese reaction, it's what the North Koreans would manage to do, particularly to South Korea.
Definitely. I think given the current status, we need to be fully aware of the possibility of escalation of war by DPRK, slaughtering of the people in South Korea, and eventually pushing other countries, including China, into areas of great uncertainty. And there is also the possibility of a second Korean War breaking out on the Korean Peninsula, bringing both China and the United States directly against each other, and that will be a disaster.
High stakes. OK, Victor Gao, Christopher Hill, thank you both very much indeed for your analysis. Very good to talk to you both, gentlemen.